I don't know if we
Yeah, I know. We still have to issue permits.
for lemonade stands.
Yep.
All right, it is 3 p.m. on March 25th. We'll go ahead and call the regularly scheduled Hutchinson Utilities Commission meeting to order. Anyone have conflicts of interest to declare?
None.
All right, right into the consent agenda. Minutes and ratify payment of bills. Anything in there anyone wanted to pull out?
I had no questions.
None here.
All right.
I make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Anthony, second by Monty. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, straight to financial statements. Jeremy, I'm guessing that is you.
Yeah, not a whole lot to really talk about. Obviously, you can see we're trending fairly well through the first 2 months. Regardless of we're down on both sides for consumption a little bit, but still, as far as seasonality is concerned, still financially looking pretty good. So, not a whole lot of major concerns or issues at this point. Obviously, because of the weather and some of the stuff going on with the pandemic, we haven't really even started projects for this year, and so I wouldn't anticipate you guys seeing a lot of work orders or a lot of project costs for a couple more months yet, or very little at the most. So I think things are going to be pushed back and some of that. So if you don't see some of those work order reports in there, it's because we haven't really incurred any costs, haven't really spent any money on things yet. So
Main Street still progressing. The construction plan is scheduled.
the latest thing I heard, yeah, April, they're still looking to move forward on that stuff. There hasn't been really any restrictions on external or outside work at this point, so everyone is moving forward as planned with the permitting and in that time frame. I did talk with Matt a little bit last week, and obviously because it's such a condensed project timeline, that if any of that stuff gets pushed back or halted for any real significant time, that project maybe moves out another year. But as of right now, unless Mark, you've heard anything different, it's on as planned.
No.
So
It's supposed to be a go.
Okay.
any questions on any of the financials at this point? Nothing better shattering to really tell you.
Anthony?
None.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Motion by Matt, second by Anthony. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, number 4, open forum. We do not have any guests here today. So straight to communication. And we don't have a city administrator or divisions. Anything you want to cover on the divisions, Jeremy, specifically?
No, there's nothing of significance of what you guys know. I asked those guys if they had anything you want me to relay to you guys, and again, no projects really going on. We're just starting to ramp up or get prepared for projects this summer if some of those things move forward. So there's nothing outside of normal at this point.
Okay. Mark?
Nothing really on the legal front. I guess I can fill in for the city administrator just to update a little bit about the city council meeting last night. As you probably
Sure.
heard, the city council did pass an ordinance affirming an emergency declaration by Mayor Forcier. And the main components of that whole declaration really are that it implements the city's emergency response plan. And obviously this is all COVID-19 related. I should have prefaced it with that. Gives the city some leeway as far as its purchasing ability, as far as the bidding laws and things of that nature. Gives the city administrator some additional power as far as being flexible with employee schedules or hiring temporary workers, closing buildings, things of that nature. But really the whole spirit of it was just so that we are prepared if and when the virus does start to affect the city of Hutchinson, gets us on the right path to a response to that.
Good. Yeah, it's necessary.
Right.
As much as we hate to admit it, I think it's definitely something we need to address, and I'm glad the city's doing that.
Right.
So, you've been doing a lot of that work up here too, Jeremy, so.
Yeah, I guess the one thing I would say is at least with the, a lot of that pandemic stuff, obviously you guys have seen kind of our steps that we're taking here as far as the various levels. The one thing that we're probably not going to hear unless we're hearing it indirectly is whether it's going to really hit the county or hit the city. Again, they're not saying things at the city level because of HIPAA laws and data privacy laws. If we haven't really seen anything at the county at this point, we may not see something come through on those interrelated maps and those things that are being updated because they've stopped testing. So those things that we just need to keep in mind. not only for us, but for the city, that those things may not continually be updated, and we may not know whether they've added it as an incident or a case or not moving forward because of the testing and stuff, unless some of the testing or some of the vials that they've had, frozen, that they go through the testing phase, but they've stopped pretty much all that here locally, Hutchinson Health, and a lot of those hospitals are no longer testing for that, so we may not know some of that stuff. So that's something we're gonna keep in mind here. As related to the document that I sent out, our second level of phase was if it hits the county or city, we may not know that, it may already be here. So we're gonna take that into consideration with the governor's executive order that came out today and see, okay, do we need to take some additional precautionary steps to thin out some of our other areas a little bit more or not. But we're obviously an essential service, as a lot of the city is. I was contacted today by the PUC and the Department of Commerce. And so I have to follow the response to them of how we're staying essential and what things are we putting in place to make sure the power stays on, the gas keeps flowing, and that Minnesotans can be assured that they're not going to lose those types of things. So I'll be preparing that response this week to send them, as I'm sure some of the stuff. The city will have to do the same thing because they've got water and wastewater and essential services as well, so they'll have to respond to some of that stuff as well on that. But as far as here, we'll keep monitoring those things. If something changes here dramatically or drastically, we'll let you guys know that here internally, and we'll keep things moving forward. So.
And I guess one other thing I would just want to touch on, I don't know if Jeremy's already communicated this to you, but depending on how things evolve, you might change your meeting structure somewhat. You might entertain the thought of having a telephonic meeting or a video meeting, something of that nature. So if something does spike, obviously we'll be in touch with you about what our recommendations are as far as conducting a meeting, but keeping everybody safe, so.
Absolutely. It's very much appreciated. Any question on that front? Jeremy, any other topics to cover?
That's it for right now. That's kind of the main focus around here the last couple of weeks since I've been back, so probably be the focus for a while here. But otherwise, operations are going as normal. We've got our contingency plans in place, and so things will keep moving forward. And nothing else other than normal at this point.
Okay. Well, Mark, thank you for filling in for Matt. Appreciate the information. All right, that'll take us to policies. Looks like we have some for review. Nothing to address for changes.
Correct.
Okay. Any questions on those policies from the commission?
None.
No.
Straight to number 7, unfinished business. Follow-up discussion on the Hutchinson City Charter as it relates to the composition of the commission. Mark, I believe we're back to you.
Oh, thanks, Don. So, you recall back in December and January, we had these 2 fairly lengthy discussions about opening up the pool of candidates for utilities commissioners. And since that time, some questions have been raised as far as what the Utilities Commission intent would be as far as the number of commissioners that would fall into this extra category, if you will, the category of someone who's a business owner or ratepayer, as opposed to a registered voter of Hutchinson, which is the current requirement. Throughout that discussion, we never talked about a number of commissioners that would fit into that category. I guess what I took from the discussion was we were talking about one candidate or one commissioner could fit into that category, but I did want to bring it back up for your consideration and possible discussion as I look forward to meeting with the Charter Commission hopefully sometime in April if the conditions allow it, so I can pass along some accurate information to them.
Okay. So you guys recall that discussion of allowing one, or I thought we were talking about one person on the commission to be live outside of city limits but have their primary business in Hutchinson and become a ratepayer and then have some skin in the game, as it were. But I guess we maybe didn't clarify specifically how many of the commission, if the whole commission could be people that would fit that category, 1, 2, so we need to clarify that.
I'll read. I pulled out some verbiage that Mark brought forth at prior meetings. Unchanged language was this: the commission shall consist of 5 persons, comma, registered voters of Hutchinson, comma, or who are the, and Mark added this, or we're proposing to change this, or who are owners of a business whose principal place of business is within the city of Hutchinson, which is a ratepayer of the Utilities Commission. That's the language that we have reviewed. And I think that still fits, the language itself. Whether we talked about it or whether I assumed it was one person, I'm on board with where you were at with that.
Yeah, because when you read it specifically, it doesn't clarify.
Right.
But for some reason, I also had one of the commission members could be a non-registered voter, as long as they're a business owner and ratepayer.
Yeah, I thought that was one too, so.
Lonnie?
No, I agree, I completely agree. I mean, we, it was implied, it was assumed, we just never really put a number to it, I guess would be my take to it, but that was my understanding as well.
I thought the language was more important than anything, just getting that hammered out.
That's where we focused, I think, yes.
Right.
Yep.
So I guess the direction that we want to give to Mark to go back to the meeting with one person to fall into that category, one member of the commission.
Okay, that sounds great, and I'll make the change to the proposed language and forward it to the charter commission.
Do you have to vote on that?
I don't think we voted
No,
before.
I just wanted to get your input so I can carry it to them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. All right, Jeremy, next up on new business, approve 3M's natural gas transportation and daily swing supply agreement.
Right, so I mentioned a few months ago, we were working through a couple of our contracted customers as far as some new pricing related to our cost of service study, and making sure that that industrial class, in addition to the contracted customers, are, being equitable and paying their fair share of the transmission and distribution facilities. We also talked a little bit about in the past, and you guys have seen contracts over the years, that 3M's contract is on a yearly basis where they have a couple different contracts in place, one for helping to purchase the commodity side of things, but then also the transportation side of things, and how much they're paying to use the transmission facilities, and then also our distribution system, since they're not a typical retail ratepayer like most of our other customers are. So this contract that we had in place expired in January. We had been working through some of the contract language with 3M. John and I met several times to talk about the proper pricing structure to put in place with our contract customers, and then also break out in these new contracts that will come forward the transmission component and the distribution component, so that it's very clear to the board here and to also those contract customers the rates that they're paying are for what portions of the infrastructure they're using. So in the old contracts, it was just a transportation charge. So for 3M, the current contract that was in place was they were paying 36 cents per decatherm for transportation charges. What we're doing in this new contract is we're breaking out that distribution or that transportation charge to say you're gonna pay X amount for the transmission side of things to use our transmission facilities, and then X amount for the distribution system that we have to put in place for you to pass those types of volumes through our distribution system to your facilities. And so with this new contract structure, we're keeping the demand charge the same for a year. We're keeping the demand charge at $9. That $9 charge covers the cost, their portions of the cost of our infrastructure and our overhead costs to maintain the facilities for the types of volumes they're running. So we're not looking to ask you guys to change the demand charge, so we want to keep that in place. But we are moving the transportation charge from 36 cents up to 47 cents. And that transportation charge of 47 cents now includes 27 cents for the distribution facilities and 20 cents for the transportation or transmission facilities. So we proposed that information to them. They were fine with it. They've signed the contract and have sent it back to us. So what's in front of you guys today is just to approve the new 3M contract for those particular rates that are in place. And then obviously the meter charges have been changed to affect the glide paths that we're on, both on the electric side and the gas side, based on the cost of service study. So that's what's in front of you today. HGIs will be coming sometime this year as well. Theirs ends in May, I believe, May or June, mid-year. Their contract is up, and so we proposed another different rate structure for them as well. And then Ole or Yeast Specialties, they are looking to get onto a contracted basis for their industrial meter. They've got 2 meters down there. One's an industrial meter and one's a large general meter. So for the industrial side of their business, which runs their fermenting facilities, that would be a contracted customer. And so as we looked at those contracted customers, the two that we currently have, plus adding another one on, we needed to make sure that we were staying fairly revenue neutral in that class as a total. So that was a part of the conversation and the analysis too, that as one customer their rates become a little bit cheaper, to making sure that we're balancing off and making sure everyone stays equitable in that class. And so, long story short, what we've arrived at is what's in the contract language for 3M today, as far as the different rate components. And then we'll look at it again as we move forward at the end of next year and this year and see if those rates are still applicable based on where you guys want to move into the future with these glide paths, as we talk about that time sometime this year as well.
So Jeremy, the new structure of the rate of the billings on this 3M contract would more closely align with what we found of a typical rate structure in the rate study. Is that correct?
Correct. So when you look at the detail in the cost of service study, it talks, for the various classes, what needs to be collected from those classes to cover those portions of your infrastructure. So when we pulled out the industrial side of class, we looked at, okay, what's it cost to run our distribution system? Whether it's the maintenance, whether it's the inspections, whether it's the capital improvements. And that industrial class as a whole, has to cover those costs. And so we've allocated that out based on those cost of service study costs to see where that would in line with the current contracts that are in place now. And it showed that we're not collecting the amount that we need to from the industrial class to cover those portions of the system that are being covered. So what these rates are reflecting is each one of those particular components with that. On the transmission side, we've talked about that. There was a separate study done on the transmission facilities where it said at a minimum you should be making a 5% rate of return on that component. John and I talked in previous meetings about what's a fair market value and what's a fairly consistent rate of return that we should be getting on those transmission facilities, because they are getting older, and every year that goes by there'll be more potential maintenance costs, upkeep on our interconnect stations and some of those things. And so what we arrived at was a 20-cent transmission charge for any customer that's going to be using those transmission facilities. And that will give us in any given year, depending on the volumes running through there, anywhere from a 10 to a 15% rate of return on that facility, which is still a fairly reasonable or low relative to a lot of those industries that people are in their rate of return in the transmission facilities. So that's another piece to think about, is at some point we want to make sure we're consistent on the transmission charge, or that at least that would be a potential recommendation coming forward, that any customer that we're going to allow on that pipeline would pay the same rate of return or the same transmission fee per decathermal volume that they're going to use of capacity, because we only have a certain amount of capacity in the pipeline that we have, and so there's value in there to maintain those things. So what we tried to create the document was a little bit more transparent for the board to see what are the costs that we need to make sure we're covering, and we wanted to make it more transparent to the customers as well, that what their transmission charge are paying are various components of the infrastructure that's needed to service them.
And that would be more consistent with their other consumer,
Correct.
small general, large general billing.
Makes sense.
And the overall financial impact to the utility as compared to the last year's contract is positive, negative?
So for 3Ms it'd be a positive, depending on the volume. So we're anticipating, depending on the volumes, anywhere from $100,000 to $130,000 increase in fees collected from them. When we bring HTI forward, there's, again, depending on the volumes, and again, we kind of know what's going on there as well, so there may be a reduction in volume. But if everything stayed the same and they had consistent volumes, HTIs would go up about 10 to 20,000, and then especially yeast would see a reduction of about that amount. So overall, from a net impact for that entire class, we'd be fairly revenue neutral. It'd just be a matter of reallocating revenue collections, just as we've done on the residential side, the small general and the large general. We're just trying to balance those pieces out. So, and then specialty yeast would still have one meter in the large general class still, so they would there you can have a split customer. They'd be paying retail on the 1 meter, which is more of their administration office area, and then their manufacturing facility that runs the high volume, so there would be contracting gas customers. So they would save some significant dollars because they're able to buy the commodity at current commodity prices or some type of system like that. So John's working through some of that with them as far as, do you wanna buy the spot market pricing, do you wanna give us volumes as of the 15th of the month or the 1st of the month, and we've locked it in based on the Ventura pricing. So I think they're probably gonna set up something similar to what he's doing with HDI. And just getting volumes once a month for what their processes are gonna be or how much they're gonna be running through those fermenters, and then lock up whatever that price is. And then obviously you guys know the natural gas prices are, fairly cheap right now relative to that, but they're gonna have to assess the risk that they're willing to take as far as contract gas or buying it off the market on a monthly basis, or how they wanna approach that. But they should see savings on the commodity side, but we do need to recover the our infrastructure and transmission distribution system costs through whatever that rate is that we're proposing to them. So,
And this would be a 1-year contract?
yes.
Would it be a 1-year contract for all 3 companies?
Yes.
Okay, so,
Especially East, we're looking, I think, totally at a 3 or 5 year contract to start with.
okay, I guess the reason for that question was in case we're terribly out of whack one way or another, either for utilities or for the customer, we could revisit it.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
question regarding the timing, just it expired January 1st and looks like it was signed by them in February. Was there an issue in getting something pulled together, or?
Yeah, just a lag of communication back and forth, and, we're usually the ones that kind of have to say, hey, your contracts are coming up, and so, stuff has to be run up the corporate ladder. I think their structure a little bit, 3M now is a little bit different too. A lot of times, a lot of the stuff would be made at the local level here. But my understanding is the contract you basically had sent to 3M here and then right to corporate. And so, I don't even think maybe some of the staff here even really had a decision in signing it or reviewing it or whatever the case may be, so. But we did talk a little bit about that, and I asked John, if we don't have this thing signed by the time the old one expires, what have we typically done? And we've typically left the current rates in place until a new contract has been signed. So I think it was just a matter of the communication and the responses coming back and getting things signed and waiting to hear if they had a concern about the change in the rates, things of that nature. So we didn't get any of that, which we were anticipating getting, some concerns or some thoughts about that, but they essentially didn't communicate anything, just signed it and kind of sent it back to us. So we're assuming from that perspective that they were okay with the rate structure, and from there, so hopefully we get the HTI one, on the same month, and have it approved as it's expiring, so we won't have, a lag of a month or two without a contract in place. That's what the intention is.
Is there any concern from a legal standpoint if we have a 2-month window like that?
Not at all.
Any other questions from the commission? No questions?
No?
I would make a motion that we approve 3M's natural gas transportation and daily swing supply agreement.
Second.
Motion by Monty and second by Anthony. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Alright, takes us to 8B, requisition 8348, Sauer WP 45L air compressor package.
Just asking the commission to approve this requisition. I know Randy had mentioned it, I think, last month or the month before that, the 2 compressors that we have in place aren't enough. We're running 3 units down there, and so we were looking to add a 3rd compressor down there to give us some redundancy on the back end in case one of those fails. We can still run two of them at full output, but having the 3 really is able to get us up and running quicker start times, and just creates less potential troubleshooting issues that we have with not having enough input into the capacity that's being pushed up for those generators. So we're asking you guys just to approve the requisition for that compressor. It is in the CIP for the year. We were anticipating having to put one of those in through some of the modeling that we were doing with the generators when they're getting installed, and just how much energy and output is needed coming into those engines.
Any questions from the commission?
Make a motion to approve requisition 8348 for Sauer WP 45L air compressor.
Second.
Motion by Anthony, second by Matt. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Alright. 8C, Approve amending the advertisement for bid on plant number 2 grounding transformer.
So we're looking for the board just to extend the advertisement for bid all 3 weeks. Obviously, you guys can imagine with things going on with the pandemic, you know, business models and people's operations have changed and people are working from home and taking care of people and things of that nature. So we thought it was a better way to just extend the advertisement for bid than to leave the current date there and not receive any bids or one, and then go back through the whole process again. So we're asking you both for this one and the next item just to extend the advertisement for bid all 3 weeks. And then what we would do is we would repost the advertisement for bids, amend it into the public paper, and we would notify all the potential people that are gonna be bidding on this project that it's been extended for 3 weeks so that they have a little bit more time to get their bids in and secure their bid bonds and things of that nature, so.
Then make a motion to approve amending the advertisement for bid for the zigzag transformer until April 21st.
Second.
All right, motion by Anthony, second by Monty. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Final item 8D, Jeremy. Same situation?
Concept, just looking to extend the advertisement bid for the large 25 MVA transformer, same time frame for that 3 weeks out until April 21st to allow bids to come in. And we'll open them that day and kind of go through that same process. But
You guys feel pretty confident that's enough time?
that's what we've been hearing from a lot of the bidders. Unless we hear something significantly different from CE Power, that's a lot of the feedback that Dan and those guys from CE Power are getting is, you know, we just need a few more weeks to get our stuff set up and get things prepared and move forward. So we, obviously in our cases, we don't wanna exclude some of the prospective bidders that have good products out there and good transformers. And obviously the more bids that we get, the more competitive they're gonna be and the better off we are, so. That's 3 weeks, I think, is sufficient at this point. If we hear something different, we're all of a sudden, we're getting to that 3 week time frame and we're hearing the same type of thing or some other circumstances have happened, then we'll have to come back and have you guys extend that further. But we're already anticipating that there's potentially a process or a little slower lead time on some of these things now because of this product supply and some of those things. So we're anticipating this probably isn't gonna happen now until spring of next year anyway, but we gotta get this process moving because we're probably looking at a 9-month, maybe even a 12-month lead time on these transformers. And so we'll do a lot of the preparation and stuff up front with the pads and getting the site prepared. And then it'll be a waiting game for, I would guess, 9 to 12 months for those things to be built. So most of the construction costs won't happen until 2021, but we want to give as many people the ability to bid on these transformers as possible. So we think 3 weeks should be enough time.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve amending the advertisement for bid on plant number 2 transformer.
Second.
Motion by Matt, second by Anthony. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Anything else to add, Jeremy?
2 more items I just want to touch on briefly with you. So we've gotten some initial feedback from our insurance claim on the transformers, so we're going to be working through that with our brokers tomorrow and probably the league as far as what's being covered, what's not at this point. I can tell you Excel, they're looking to cover the cabinet components of the transformer up there, half of the large transformer and all of the small transformers. So netting out our deductible and some of these other costs, you know, they're looking at a reimbursement claim of about $186,000, I think it was. Half of the big transformers, about $100,000. They said they're not going to potentially cover it at this point because they perceive that's related to the fire loss, and our policy doesn't cover a fire loss. It's more mechanical breakdown. So we're going to talk with our brokers tomorrow and talk about, and so I haven't reached out to the league yet because I've been waiting for some information, but one of the questions I need to ask the league, are they going to cover that component of the transformer if it's perceived it's a fire loss? Because our fire loss insurance is underneath the league, not underneath Excel. And if not, you know, how do we accommodate that piece? We've also incurred some costs as far as logistics of pulling out the old transformer, putting in the new transformer. So we've had to hire cranes and get all that transportation logistics done to a tune of about $50,000. And so there's no mentioning of that, of being able to recover that cost through this claim. So that's a conversation point tomorrow. And then we've also incurred about $5,000 worth of claims for CE Power that weren't things that we thought needed to be done. They needed to be done by Excel as far as what they thought, so there's nothing that's referencing that in the letter that we got from them. So there's a couple bullet point questions I have as far as their coverage and how that moves forward. And then obviously we need to talk to the league about what they're covering or not covering, and then we need to take some remedial steps if we can't get something resolved. But that's kind of where that piece is at. So we did get some initial conversation or some communication back on that piece. So I'll keep you guys updated as things move forward and I hear some more information. The last piece I just wanted to make you generally aware of, and it hasn't happened yet, but there's some potential legislation coming out in the third federal stimulus bill coming out that may be applicable for us depending on if it gets approved the way it stands. And this is something to keep in mind. I don't think it necessarily maybe will majorly impact us financially, but for a lot of utilities it may. And so one of the provisions that's currently in there as far as debt collector sections is for people that are providing essential services and other types of services. So right now we can't disconnect people. So we have to allow power and energy to stay on during this time period. And we can't charge late fees, we can't do those types of things. There's a provision in this third stimulus bill that says that they may require debt collectors, and right now we're defined as a debt collector of essential services because it's energy, right? And so one of the provisions that's being talked about now is that you cannot start recollecting on unpaid balances for 120 days after the pandemic has been ceased. So that's just something that we need to kind of be aware of, that if the executive order comes out that the pandemic is done in July and this bill goes in place, we have to wait 4 months before we can even start collecting on unpaid balances. So my obviously concern, as you guys tell you about this, which is probably a concern for you that I've expressed to APPA, is I understand the 120-day rule and the debt collection and allowing people to come back, but for a lot of utilities that don't have cash balances or adequate cash flow to cover, for sure a minimum of 4 months, could be 7, 8, 9 months of uncollectibles. How are you going to address that? Because there is no provision in there right now that I've read that precludes the retail utility from having to pay their wholesale supplier for their power. So a lot of these utilities that are getting all their power from a wholesale supplier, they're required to make those payments on a monthly basis to the wholesale supplier, but they're not able to collect, from the retail customers for that long period. That's going to put them in a precarious situation. So, so I've let that be known to APPA and some of the legislators that the 120 days may be a little long for a lot of people. Better starting point maybe is 30 or 60, depending on how you define that. But that's just something I want you to keep in mind as we move forward through this process. The other piece that at this point it's too early to tell for a utility how many customers are going to not pay their bills, how big these balances are going to get. Is it going to be predominantly residential that are just going to forego making payments, or are we going to start having large commercial customers, small general, large general? So that's one thing that we have to just keep in the back of our mind. I know a lot of some of the utilities down south are already seeing a significant amount of businesses calling them saying, we just don't have the ability to pay. So they're trying to address some of those things down there. We haven't got any of that yet up here. Of course, we just did our last billing cycle and just had our last payment due date of March 15th, and so that was really before all this stuff came down. So we haven't seen a lot of change in delinquencies or balances yet. But if this progresses another month, 2 or 3, I can see these types of things coming forward. So the reason I'm mentioning it to you is there may be something down the road where I may need to come to the board and say, hey, how are we going to address uncollectibles? Are we going to allow people to pay back over a significant amount of time? How do we want to craft some of these things? Because I would imagine if some people weren't paying for 5, 6, 7 months, there's going to be some large bills out there. So I just want you to keep that in the back of your mind, and as I get more information, and as I start seeing some of the impacts here, I'll certainly keep you guys in mind. But that's some current legislation that's being at least drafted in the third stimulus bill that may get approved. So.
If you start tracking that number, Jeremy, and see it trending towards something that we should have a policy level conversation about, feel free to let us know.
Yep, I will certainly do that. That's all I got.
Anything from the rest of the commission? All right, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Monty, second by Anthony. All in favor, signify by saying